Hi and welcome to this masterclass. I'm Mapal, and in today's video we're going to be going through how you can clone yourself in After Effects. I'll be working with the PA32 UCXR monitor behind me, which is going to be super important when we actually get to the coloring stage of this, because I want to preserve the color space that I'm shooting in right now, which is S-Log3. And using a color accurate monitor just means that I can work with that and then also color grade it super accurately in post, which is always super nice when you're doing compositing. I want to focus on the three different ways I kind of think of cloning. The first one is the simplest one, which is simply cutting out a part of the frame. You can do this in pretty much any program. The second one is a little bit more complicated, which is where you can start having some interaction or overlapping, which you will be using some rotoscoping for. And then lastly, you have the next level of compositing, which is adding in some more effects to maybe spawn in a clone or despawn a clone. Now, the most important thing you have to keep in mind when you're shooting full clone clips is to make sure that the clip is pretty contained. By that I mean you don't have a bunch of moving objects, moving lighting, which is just gonna make cutting out and actually cloning your subject very, very difficult, because you might have contrasting lighting situations. So if you're shooting outside, this is something to be super aware of. Right now we are inside, so I'm controlling all the light, which is gonna make this a whole lot easier. With that being said, I think we can hop into After Effects and actually start working on the script that you've been seeing right now and introducing some clones in various different ways. We are finally ready to hop into After Effects, where we can start working with the footage that we just saw and basically create the clones. As I mentioned, we are gonna be working with color spaces. So really we wanna preserve that S-Log3 that I've shot in on this Sony camera that you're seeing. The same principle applies regardless of what you are shooting with. It's just the practice of learning how to work with color spaces in After Effects. And this is super important. We want to start by setting up the color space. Now, I know that I've shot in S-Log3. What you can do if you don't know what color space the footage is in, you can right click on the footage. You can go to Interpret Footage, go to Main, then go to the Color tab, and it'll tell you the media color space of the clip that you're working with. So in this case, S-Log3, S-Gamut3, Cine. What I'm gonna do is you can either click this BPC button, it'll have either 8, 16, or 32, or you can click the rocket. It goes to the same thing, but I'll typically click the 16 BPC, which takes me straight to the Color tab, where I can then change it from Adobe Color Managed to OCIO Color Managed. You'll get a little pop-up. Just hit OK, and then switch it to 32 bits per channel, which just gives us the most color depth. So if you imagine a gradient from black to white, if you only have 8 bits, then you only have 8 colors in that gradation, whereas if you have 32, well, you'll have 32. So you just have a lot smoother color gradients and more depth. Then I typically switch the work at the 3D LUT interpolation to tetrahedral. Doesn't really matter unless you're using a LUT. I just like to do it just in case. And then the working color space is what we want to click. Now, if you just open the drop down, it'll just be a very short list of options that you'll have, which unless you are working in ACES, you'll have to click the Show All button, and then we get a lot of options. Here you just want to find whatever media space that you're actually working with. So in this case, as we checked, S-Log3, S-Gamut3, Cine is the color space that we want to be working with, and then we'll just want to hit OK. So now our project is set up to work with S-Log3 footage and preserve that in the way that we want to. So next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my main talking clip, which I've just dragged in a bunch of clips here that we're going to be working with, into the project file. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to create a composition based on all these settings. This is important, especially if you're rotoscoping, to keep those settings to make sure that the roto is as accurate as possible. Now you see a problem here is it looks wrong. This is not what it looked like in camera. What we need to do is, if I just take my composition, I'll just drag it into the composition folder just for organization. But if I go to my main talking clip and I'll just drag it into clips so I know exactly what I'm working with, I'll select that clip, I'll right click, I'll go to Interpret Footage, go to Main, and then go into the Color tab, and you see it's overwritten it to an ACES media color space. I want to keep this in the S-Log3 color space because that is what I wanted to work with. So I'm going to go find it again, S-Log3, S-Gamut3, Cine, and I'm going to hit OK, and immediately you'll notice a difference. Per default, this will add like an sRGB or Rec 709 or some sort of preview LUT, so you can kind of see what the footage looks like when it's converted to, let's say, a Rec 709. In my instance, at least for now, the way I like to work, I just set it to none just to make sure that it actually looks like what it's supposed to, and I can see that it is. With that, we now have our composition and project ready to work in. Now, for the sake of ease, I'm just going to trim this down to be roughly 10 seconds, which is just going to make it a little bit easier for us to work with, because it does get very, very heavy when we are working with the color spaces and that sort of stuff. So we just want to keep it as casual as possible. Now, I'm just going to scroll to a point here. It doesn't really matter. This is just all for the sake of this video. So I'm just going to Option and a left bracket to trim everything before the marker, and I'm going to go to the end and I'm going to Option and right bracket to trim everything after the marker. So now we just have this composition here where I have me standing there and talking. Now we want to get into actually cloning ourselves, and this first method is by far the easiest, and you've probably done it before, but it is a very simple mask we're going to be working with. So I have a clip here and I'm just going to drag that into our composition, and once again we need to do the interpretation to every single clip. Now there's a very easy way of doing this, and that is by right-clicking the clip that we've already worked with, go to interpret footage and remember interpretation, and then I'm going to select all the other clips that we are going to be working with, which will also shut in S-Log3. I'm going to go to interpret footage and then apply interpretation, and then that fixes it. So now I'm going to take the bedroom clip, I'm just going to move it into clips because we've used that, and then we can just close that back down so I don't get confused. Now I'm just going to find a section of this that happens to have me in the bedroom over here, and this was done because it's going to be super easy to cut out. So I'm over here, and I'm going to hit G to bring up the pen tool. You can also just go up here and select the pen tool, and I'm just going to mask out here just a rough area. It doesn't have to be super perfect. The whole point of this is that it's easy. So we have two separate clips where the objects are not interacting whatsoever, which makes it so that we can actually use this. There's no overlapping of any kind, so we can use a very simple mask as long as the camera is the same and the lighting is the same as well, at least for the most part. Obviously, there's going to be some differences just with having a light source that's lighting me and some natural light, but in most cases it's going to be pretty similar because it was filmed very close to each other. So I'm going to hit F to bring up the feather for this mask. Now that is because, as you can see, there's a little bit of a line here. There's a little bit of a difference in the lighting, which is to be expected. It's very hard to keep it exactly the same. But I'm just going to feather that out. So I'm just going to increase that to about 144, and we have blended those two together. So now we have a clone of me trying on a jacket while I'm also standing there and talking. And that is the first method. Now we can go to the next one, which is a little bit more fun. And that is having me spawn in, and that is where we get to some really fun compositing. So what I can do here is I just want to find the section where I actually act my way into the scene, which is very important in selling the effect. So I'm going to be standing here and I'm going to pretend that I am sort of flying in here, boom, and I just want to maybe drag this over so it's sort of not happening right in the first bit. Next step for me here is I want to create a general mask that I can sort of use. So in this case, the way this scene is set up is I have this little foreground or like middle ground kind of element that is right behind me, but it separates the background a little bit. And I want to use that to my advantage in terms of blending the clips. So with my spawning clip selected, I can always trim it at the end here as well, but I want to go forward. I want to see roughly how far I'm going. So this is about the furthest I'm going to be sticking out to the right. So what I can do is I can just draw a little bit of a shape here, and I'm just going to try and hug it as close as possible. Maybe go something like this, and then right across here and use that as a little bit of a seam. So now we have this mask, and I am going to hit F on this, and then I will just increase the feather just a little bit, just to get a little bit of that contact shadow. You get a little bit of just a little bit of blending between these, and I'll just clean this up just a little bit here. But so now we have this, and obviously it's not what we want it to be at all, because I mean we have me flying in here and that's just not going to work. So what I want to do is I want to utilize what you would typically call a plate, which is just, it can be a still image, it can be a video clip, but it's just empty of the space that you're working with. And the way I typically do that is by recording just a little bit before or a little bit after of each clip where there's just nothing going on. So with this duplicated, I'm just gonna rename this plate so I know exactly what it is. I'm gonna solo it so I can see exactly what I'm working with. And I'm just gonna go to the very beginning here, and I am just looking for a frame that has nothing in it. So right here in the beginning, there's absolutely nothing going on. So I'm gonna right click, I'm gonna go to time, and I'm gonna go freeze frame. So now we have a frame where nothing ever changes, it's just this for all eternity. And I'll just put this below me spawning in for now, and I'll just hide that. So the next step of this is hiding, or not hiding, but emphasizing the spawn in. And I'm gonna be doing that. You can make your own maps, but I'm gonna be using this piece of footage I have here, which is just a clip of this little shockwave type of thing. And I'm just gonna right click on it. I'm gonna go to interpret footage, and I'm gonna go to main. I'm gonna go to the color tab and just set this to a Rec 709, if I can find that. So boom, Rec 709, and then we have that clip in the color space that we want it to be, so that if I go into, let's say, Rec 709, it actually looks the way it's supposed to. Now I'm gonna place this, I'm gonna hit Alt to bring up the rotation. I'm just gonna rotate this to be a little bit more where I kind of want it and kind of get it to look. I'm gonna hit Shift S to bring up the scale. I'm gonna unlink that, and I'm just gonna stretch it out just a little bit to get a little bit more vertical in the impulse here that we've got going on. With that in there, what I'm going to do is I'm gonna hit Shift Command C to pre-comp it. I'm gonna name this Displacement Map Pre, and I wanna make sure that I move all attributes into the new composition, and I'm gonna hit OK. Then I'm gonna go into this composition. I'm gonna hit Command Y to create a solid, and I'm just gonna make this completely black and then put it at the bottom there, which is important for what we're about to do next. And then at the very end, I'm just gonna add another freeze on last frame, just so it extends forever with the black at the very end. So we just have nothing but a black screen there. Now I'm going to my spawn in clip, which is where I am landing. I'm gonna use FX Console to add an effect. This is a free plugin you can get. New After Effects versions have also added this in as like a built-in feature, I'm pretty sure. But what we are going to add, we are going to add a displacement map, and we are also going to add a camera lens blur. And this is just a nice little effect stack. I'm gonna hide the camera lens blur for now. So I am going to set the displacement map as the displacement map layer, and I'm gonna select effects and masks. I'm gonna change these two to luminance and lightness. Those are the values that we have in the other clip, which is just black and white values. And we can start playing around with this, and you can start seeing some displacement happening in here, where we have just a little bit of that initial, or like the actual layer affecting the way that the image is looking. Now, you might notice that this is just a little bit off, so it's not fully centered. That is what the displacement map does. It does move your layer just a little bit. As you can see, it just looks a little bit funky here. And one thing that I do like to do is in this specific layer right here, just because this can be very detailed and very sharp, adding a little bit of a fast box blur to just smoothen it out just a little bit so it's a little less detailed, which just, in my opinion, looks a little bit nicer. But then let's show this back up. And you can see it kind of moves it just a little bit, so we'll want to make sure that we actually get it lined back up in the way that we want to. We're just going to solo that up, and then I'm going to zoom out, and I'm going to disable my mask. I'm just going to set that to none so I can kind of see the edges of everywhere that I'm working with, and I just want to make sure that I line that back up there, so it's kind of lined up in the way that we have it stretched. We still maybe need to move it just a smidge. So now we have it exactly where we want it to be. One thing I do want to do is just, we see this little bit of a cutoff, which is exactly where that layer is at. So if I go in here, we can just go into this and we can crush the black levels a little bit to be actual pure black. And that'll just give us a little bit of a nicer looking image in the end there. With that, we can now time the exact timing up. So we can just move that over a little bit so that we actually have it showing where we want it to show, so that we actually sell the effects of when that is happening. Now this is like the base of the effect before we add just a little bit more impact to it. The next step is going to be taking the main talking clip. I'm going to duplicate it. I'm going to put it at the very top, and I'm going to rename it main roto, because we're going to be rotoscoping. So I'm going to double click this, and that'll bring up the individual layer view. And when you are going to rotoscope, you want to make sure you're actually using one of those display reference conversion LUTs. If you set it to none, rotoscoping is not going to work. It's just going to be black. So I'm going to select my rotoscoping tool, and I'm just going to draw myself in. So I'm just going to draw, and that'll be selecting the subject that I want, and then I can Option and Draw or Alt click, and that will then remove parts that I don't want. Now, the more time you spend on this, the better it will be. So in general, you should spend as much time as possible on this rotoscope so you can get the best possible results, especially with something like, one thing that I struggle a lot with is like my arm hairs. As you can see right here, it's just a little bit fuzzy, which just means I have to put in some extra work if I want a really, really clean mask. In this instance, I'm just going to be fairly quick with it and just get a general mask so we can get the idea of what a clone is going to be like. And then it'll be up to you to refine it in your individual projects. Now, with something like hair, you can click the roto brush tool, and you can change to the refine edge, which lets you, well, refine your edges. It's perfect for something like hair where you can just paint it the hair, and then it does, in general, a pretty good job of not only tracking the hair, but also separating the strands of hair. So right now you can see it's getting a lot of that detail in the hair, which would not be possible with just a rotoscope tool. So I like using that. I sometimes use it on the ears as well. Sometimes that gets a little bit lost. You can use it on areas like arm hair and stuff like that. But once you have that in, you can dial in your settings, all that sort of stuff. But then you just want to go through realistically, frame by frame, just making sure that the mask is good all the way through. In some clips where the motion is pretty consistent or not very big, you can skip larger chunks and it should be fine. I always recommend double checking, especially when you are working on a serious project. In this instance, we're just gonna fly by a little bit quick, and I will see you on the other side. So right, like you see some of this, it's not perfect, but you can go in and just adjust that a little bit on a per frame basis, which is why you wanna go frame by frame ideally, so you can get the best possible mask. But I'm just gonna skip to the end for the sake of time. Once your rotoscope is done, you wanna do one very crucial step, and that is to freeze the rotoscope, which just makes it so that you're not gonna mess it up by doing something by accident, moving something or changing something, and then messing up the whole rotoscope and then it having to recalculate the rotoscope. So just wanna make sure you freeze that in before you head back into the main composition where we are gonna continue the work, but I'll see you at the other side of these 242 frames of freezing. Now that the rotoscope is frozen, we can head back into our main composition where if I solo our rotoscope layer, we officially have a rotoscope of me. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's gonna do the job for what we needed to, which is essentially just a cutout mat. Now this is where it's gonna get really, really fun. So right now we have the main talking and we have the main roto, right? So we have these two, and then we introduced the bedroom guy, and then we wanted to introduce this little spawn figure here, which I just want to get the exact position of. I want to get it as close as possible to that. And that is the tricky thing about working with this displacement map, is that it gets a little bit tedious, but I think that is pretty good. So I want to go back in there and I want to make sure that I turn my mask back on, since we turned that off for a little bit. And then I just want to adjust it a little bit here, just so we don't get that edge in there, which we do see since it was moved around just a little bit. Just clean it up and make sure we have a nice looking mask around here. So we get a little bit of that contact shadow down here, which is me standing there. And then we also get this guy in the background, which spawns in. So as you can see, we have this little bit where it cuts, and we can very visually see the cut, which is where our background plate is going to come in a second. But then we have this little burst here of me landing in. I might want to move the shockwave just a little bit to be a little bit more precise, but we get some really nice displacement of the background here without affecting me, because obviously we have that roto of myself in front. So the first thing I want to do is just take this and let's scale this up just a little bit more, and maybe move it up and to the left just a tiny bit so that we get a little bit of a nicer displacement in there. The next step is adding in the camera lens blur, which we're just going to do really, really quick since we're working on that layer anyways. Again, we want to pick the displacement map pre, effects and mask, and then we can just turn up that blur a little bit, which is just going to blur the same area that we are displacing essentially. So it just adds a little bit to the look of the displacement. It just makes it look a little bit more distinct. Now the second step is the plate. So obviously we want the plate in there, and the easiest way to do that, now we've moved everything around a little bit. So realistically, we can just delete the plate. We'll duplicate the spawn in, and we will rename that duplicate plate, and we'll just move that below the spawn in, and then we will just delete all the effects, and we'll do what we did before, which is just go to the very beginning, and we will add a keyframe of that'll hold that specific. So we just go to the very beginning here, and let's just right click and time and freeze frame. So now we have this little boom of me landing in here. Now the next step is, let's just make sure that we are lined up about as good as we can. Now this next step that we're about to do is going to hide that a little bit, and that is just a little bit more compositing to sell the effect. We are going to add an adjustment layer, and we are going to add the transform effect to that. We are going to also add a slider control, and we'll just duplicate that, which will just give us control over the wiggle expression that we're about to add. So I'm going to alt click the position. I'm going to type wiggle down here in the expression box, and then I'm going to pick whip the first slider, and then I'm going to type in comma, and then I'm going to pick whip the second slider, and now we can keyframe both of those, which is the amplitude and the frequency of the wiggle. So I'm going to keyframe both of these. I'm going to set a keyframe. I'm going to hit U to show the keyframes on this layer. I'm going to move these back a couple of frames, go forward just a little bit, maybe a couple frames after I actually appear, and set this to something like 4x50, which will just give us a nice big shake, and then go forward a little bit more. I'm going to copy those first keyframes, I'm going to paste them, and that'll just mean that we go back to normal. So what we should have here is, if I just crop in this render region just a little bit, and let's review that real quick. So maybe that's a little bit too much. So we can maybe scale this down to maybe like a 2, so it's a little bit more of a subtle shake. Whoops, I accidentally changed both of those. Want to keep that at 50 and the other one at 2, so it's a little bit more of a smoother shake, and maybe even just a 1, and then move these keyframes in a little bit more, so it's a little bit more aggressive in the shake and then the fade out. And then we are going to enable motion blur on that specific layer, so that we actually get some motion blur in the shake as well, since that makes it just feel a little bit more realistic. Now there's one problem we're having here, and that is the black border. The easiest way to go and fix that is add another adjustment layer, and we are just gonna add a transform effect, and then we are just gonna scale this up to something like 105. You really just wanna make sure that you are just covering the whole screen so you don't have any black edges. And then we have this nice little shake effect. Just like that, we have added a clone, which was super easy. And we've added a second clone that spawns in with a little bit of compositing, where we have some impact shakes and stuff like that. The last thing that you can do is, if we have something like this person in front here, and if I just add this in front of my roto, because we want this to be in front of everything, then we're gonna solo this, and I'm just gonna find a super quick angle here of me actually being in front. So maybe I will come in, let's say right here, and I will move forward until I'm out of frame, and let's just move that just a little bit before the spawn in. So maybe I leave right as I spawn in here, so I don't actually cover that. Boom. I'm gonna double click this layer, and then we are just gonna move this render region to be our full composition again. And now I'm going back to my rotoscoping tool, and I'm just gonna rotoscope myself again. And in this case, again, you wanna make sure that it is as clean as you possibly can, especially because this is gonna be in front. So it's gonna be a lot more visible. It's a lot harder to hide all those little things. So in an instance like this, you might really wanna go frame by frame to make sure you get the absolute best roto that you can, and just go through and make sure you get all those little details and really emphasize. Now, I'm a bit of a silly goose in this instance because I have glosses on, which makes it a lot harder, because essentially I would have to rotoscope out this piece of gloss right here, but not the face, and then all that sort of stuff. So you can be as precise as you want with this. You can also kind of, depending on the situation, you can maybe have a little bit of an easier time than I'm having in this specific instance here. They make me look very cool, but they also create a lot of work, especially right here. where I'm gonna be standing right behind that, it's gonna really, really suck. So keep that in mind when you are working with something like this. I am then gonna freeze this. I'm gonna enable motion blur because obviously I'm moving pretty quickly and there's motion blur happening. And I'm gonna go back into my main composition here. And now we have this cutout of me that is walking past. And then if I unsolo that, we can see we now have some interaction there. And again, this is why it's so important to get that really nice roto when you're working with something like this. But now you have me walking in front here, and then you'll see me come in right behind myself here in just a second. And then we have this spawn in right there. So that pretty much sums up how you can clone yourself in After Effects. Now, the second part of this, like the second most important part of working with this workflow where we are preserving the colors, is how you export it. So one part is importing it and setting up the project correctly. The second part is actually exporting it so that you can use it and color grade it like you would any other footage that is shot the same way. Now, it's pretty simple. All you're gonna do is go into composition, you're gonna add to the render queue, and then in the output module, you're gonna click that. You want to set your format to whatever you want. I usually do a QuickTime, and then I do Apple ProRes 422 HQ. That is my go-to. I do that with everything, unless I do MP4s. Then you want to change the depth to trillions of colors, which is half the reason that we're doing this, is so we can preserve all that color information, color depth. You want to go into the color tab, and you want to make sure that you are setting this to the S-Log3 that you were working with this whole time, so that it actually is the same color space as the rest of the footage that you're gonna be working with. So again, S-Log3, S-Gamut3, Cine, I'm gonna hit OK. You're gonna pick wherever you wanna render this to, and you're gonna render this out, and then I will see you in DaVinci in just a second. Now I am in DaVinci, and I have this original clip that we were just working on, which was like the main talking clip, which I have color graded. I've just done a very quick grade on it just so you can see. And then I have the clone footage that we just worked on here. So let's just trim this down really quick just for the sake of swiftness here. But we have this, and all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go into the color tab, and I'm gonna add this to the same group as my other footage, which is gonna have that grade. I'm gonna add into the current group, and just like that, you'll see that they look the same, because that is the whole point of us doing this, is so that we can grade it and actually make it look like it's part of the scene as a whole. So now if I play this back, we have clones walking everywhere. And as I said, the more you refine it, the more you take time to actually go in and do some really clean rotoscopes, the better this is gonna look. But for a super quick little preview here, this is pretty rad, if I do say so myself. And that is the basics of cloning and working with color spaces in After Effects. So I hope that you feel like you've learned something new in this masterclass. And with that being said, I just want to say thank you and happy learning. See you again next time.